Hello and welcome to everybody. My name's Alex Taylor Kamara. I'm a barrister at Garden Court Chambers. And on the panel today, we've got Dr. Ethna Quinn, Dr. Abena Owusu Bempa, and Andre Montgomery Johnson. And we're all going to be on the panel today talking about and discussing the issue of drill music and some of the topical areas and issues that have arisen within this genre of music. Before we start, there are a few things, as they say, as far as terms and conditions are concerned, that I need to address first. The first is that all of you as attendees have been placed on mute, and you'll see at the bottom of your screen that there are some question and answer windows. So that's going to be available for everybody to add in any questions that they want. There's also a chat function which will enable other queries and questions and feedbacks to be used. And Amy, who you won't see at the moment, but she's in the background with David, will be uploading details of any follow-on seminars or webinars that we do and any dates and times. We're also going to have a number of resources available which will be circulated to all the delegates who have registered for the webinar. And they'll also include details of other speakers and panelists who will be dealing with the follow-on areas that we have. And the final area of the terms and conditions is that this webinar is being recorded. And what that means is that the audio and video of the panelists and anyone who speaks, if they're unmuted, will be recorded. And so it might be used for marketing purposes or websites or social media. So without further ado, just starting with what the whole series is about. This is going to be the first of 6 webinars that we're actually going to be holding. And whilst we're not intending to deal with the consequences and all the effects of violence and gun crime and knife crime and the consequences within the inner city, we are going to try to look at and address some of the burning issues and areas that people have raised over a number of years and months, that the issue of drill music has been in the media. Now, we've all come from a different background and experience in relation to contact with drill music and those who are involved in drill music. And so hopefully between us we'll be able to deal with a number of the issues that people would want to discuss and ask questions about. When we first decided to hold this webinar, we were initially thinking about a single webinar, but we realized very quickly that there are so many issues and so many burning questions that it would just not be possible to deal with it all within one session. So this is why we've decided to do it over a series of 6 webinars. And ours will be the first webinar session. And the follow-on ones will be split firstly in relation to challenging and the admissibility of drill music and within the criminal justice system, and also drill injunctions and the ancillary orders that will follow through from it. And so we've got 3 parts to the drill section, and then we'll have another 3 parts which will deal with gangs, understanding gun culture, debunking prosecution myths, and the policing of gangs, gangs pre-trial issues and criminal behaviour orders, and gangs how to exclude so-called gang evidence in criminal trials, and challenging the joint enterprise. So you can see that there's quite a large number of areas that we will try to address and deal with. So this is the first one that we're going to try to address some of those issues. Details in relation to each of the panelists will be put forward in one of the sections that I was talking to you about, which was the chat, or indeed might come up in the question and answer section. So you'll have full details of who they are, and they'll introduce themselves to you in further detail when I call each one of them. But just to give you an insight, Andre Montgomery Johnson is a journalist and a film producer, and Ethna Quinn is a lecturer at the University of Manchester, and Abana Owusu-Bempah is also assistant professor of law at the London School of Economics and Political Science. So you have a wealth of experience and knowledge on the panel to deal with questions that I hope some of you ask. Now, when I was indicating at the beginning that we're not trying to offer a solution or try and deal with the real problems that there are as far as knife crime, violence, drug dealing and drugs are concerned, no doubt it won't have passed you. The Black Lives Matter movement have helped to sort of focus attention and bring into people's rooms and homes some of the issues that everybody is talking about in their own homes or on the street or in coffee shops, etc. And it's important that we continue through this to try to redress some of the issues that are raised throughout the country. Particular attention has been focused on the police, and it's correct that that is one of the areas of concern. But of course, the police are only one part of the criminal justice system, and they are at the forefront at the beginning in relation to arresting people and dealing with things. So there are a number of areas that we're all going to have to grapple with and deal with as far as policy is concerned, as far as funding is concerned, and what the main focus should be and how we should focus attention in relation to those issues. Now, some of you probably won't have had the opportunity to go into the courts or to prisons, but I can tell you from personal experience that it's an extremely distressing and depressing situation to see, especially if you were to go into the Old Bailey cells, to see one cell after another full of young black men being on trial for the most serious offences. But on the other side of that, and sometimes not realised, is that a lot of the victims in those sort of cases are also young black men. And so it's a very real problem and a very real issue that we have to deal with. But one of the concerns that we have found over the last few years is there's been an increasing amount of use of social media, videos, films, lyrics and songs, and in particular the targeting of drill music and the lyrics that people have used within their songs, and also the playing of those songs as evidence in court. And you'll hear from some of the panelists in relation to their experience and their knowledge of how this has affected people in a dramatic way. And it's not a small issue, and it's not an issue which one can just sort of put to one side, because millions of pounds have been specifically allocated to deal with social media, to deal with focusing on gangs and gang activity. And the police have specialist groups and targeted organisations to deal with taking down drill music videos and preventing a lot of the artists from actually performing and trying to earn a living. So these are very real issues and very real consequences for a number of people. And of course, the discussion which goes on is as to whether or not these sorts of videos themselves create more problems and more violence on the streets. And you'll hear from the panelists varying views in relation to that, and whether or not this is the right focus and the right time to be focusing attention on this particular area. Because this isn't a new area, and Andre will tell you, as far as drill music is concerned, where it started from and its origins in Chicago, and how it's developed into a very distinct British-owned style of music. But the issue in relation to attacking and looking at music as a way of trying to depict what individuals are up to and what they're doing is definitely not a new area. I've been a barrister for over 30 years now and been at Garden Court for 20 years. And it's really surprising to see that even now, going back over the years, the same issues are being raised. What has changed, of course, is the genre of music, those who are being targeted, and how the evidence is being used. And in particular, what we want to do is to look at how these areas are being used within the law, and how the effects have much wider consequences than people might at first consider. If you look historically in relation to this, a lot was said many years ago about punk music, was said about hip-hop music, and how those genres were looked at. But of course, over the years, when people look back at those particular genres, they have a completely different perception and view about how things were, and whether or not you're looking at the BBC banning the punk music groups, and you remember, I'm sure some of you anyway, God Save the Queen being banned on various platforms. But of course, when people are looking back about it, they're not looking back about it as it was at the time. They're looking back about it from their own point of view, rather than how things were at the particular time. Just giving you one example in relation to that. 15 years ago, I was junior counsel in a murder trial, representing a music artist. And the police and the prosecution used to support their case that he was a gang member, and suggestions that he glorified violence and carried guns. They wanted to use certain videos and play certain lyrics and present their argument to the jury as bad character in relation to that individual. And the judge, during the course of that trial, failed to understand that, in fact, there wasn't an actual gang as was being perceived, and the so-called gang was no more than a collective of individuals who had collaboratively put together their own narratives and their own stories, some of it real and some of it not real, about incidents that were taking place and their own inner city life. I don't think they'll mind me mentioning, but the so-called gang that the judge was referring to was the So Solid crew. And the so-called gang member was a UK rapper, Mega Man. Unfortunately, he was acquitted, but only after having faced a retrial in relation to that. And so the issue in relation to rap music or any other type of music being focused on is not something which is new. But unfortunately, the fight still goes on as far as trying to address music being used as evidence to secure prosecutions and the effects on individuals. One area which is of concern, and you'll hear this specifically from Ethna Quinn, is that there seems to be a lack of credible experts that are available. As far as judges are concerned, as far as lawyers are concerned, and the public and jury, we all need educating in relation to particular areas of music, and of course lyrics, and of course how it's performed and where it's performed. The police themselves have taken this very seriously, because they've put forward their own experts, and they'll all be police officers usually that they'll rely upon. But as far as defence cases are concerned, they seem to be very poorly equipped and don't have the knowledge and experience to actually put forward what they want to say in relation to their own defence. And I certainly have experienced in cases I've done where far more research and knowledge ought to be put into presenting the cases than actually do. And the regular reference that is made during cases is to reference to "I shot the sheriff" as being the full extent of the information which people wish to put forward. So these are very real issues and very real problems that we need to try to address. But the issue doesn't end there, because there are consequences even after a criminal trial in relation to the use of this evidence. And there are areas such as in areas of immigration, in areas of family proceedings, where this sort of material, as far as music is concerned, is being used against individuals. And as you can imagine, in an immigration case, or indeed even in a family proceedings, how that would affect them. And the newest development of this area is the so-called government white paper called the Online Harms Bill. And in relation to that, there are extreme concerns in relation to how that area is going to be looked at, who is going to look at it, who is going to monitor it, and who are the individuals put into the positions to monitor that area. And I was looking at the Online Harms Bill, the white paper, and it really shocked me to see where within the discussions they had placed the discussions about taking down material from the internet. And it fits in this way. In the first section, it deals with terrorism. In the next section, it deals with taking material online relating to gangs. And underneath that, it deals with paedophiles. So the seriousness that certainly the government seemed to have placed on taking down material on the internet is in between those two very distinct areas and very troubling areas. So this isn't an area which is looked at lightly or not considered properly. And I think this is an area which we all need to take a step back and try to understand what the whole genre is about and what people are trying to get across. So hopefully, once you've had a look at what we wish to say and what we're discussing, you'll have something to say and something to contribute in relation to this issue. What I was hoping to do after this opening address to you is to play a short video just to give you some understanding of what the area of drill, if you don't know anything about it, is all about. And this is something which, in fact, one of our panelists, Andre, has been a part of. And this is a short video. The full-length video is much longer, but this will at least give you some indication and some idea of the area and issues that we hope to deal with and hope to talk about. So if I can ask...
drill came out of nowhere, and I was like, wow, what's this?
It became a huge thing, a way of young disadvantaged people to talk about their lives.
The controversial drill music scene where rappers boast of stabbing or shooting their rivals.
This is what is going on in Britain right now. You might have to pay attention to this. Man can't tell me about UK drill, try to tell me that the sound is neat.
A drill beat is the flow and the pattern of the beat. It's dark, it's aggressive, it touches your soul.
Make man start flinging out tantrums.
I was just making like little rap freestyles and putting them on my social media. That blew up very quickly.
Can't finish their sentence.
It's the longest I've ever stayed at a job because the music kept me on road.
I grew up in the gutter every day. I was rolling around with my knife.
I lost my son. These days, if someone gets stabbed, no one really cares.
You're being influenced by a culture which promotes hurting somebody.
Think about what you are saying. We're not going to sit back if we feel that it's inappropriate.
We couldn't release the music we wanted to release.
That really is censorship.
This music gives us an opportunity to make 6 figures, to stay in London.
They're trying to express how they feel in the only way that is accepted.
This is what we're doing, and we're not going to stop.
Drill as a genre, it's helped a lot of people come out of that environment.
And you know what? Them songs about violence and drugs caught everybody's attention.
Well, I hope that's whet your appetite a little bit in relation to it. It's an extremely well put and well put together documentary. It's over an hour long, so obviously we couldn't play you all of it, but at least you've got an insight in relation to some of the areas. And you have, as one of our panelists, Andre, available to take you through some of the areas and issues. So without further ado, I will now hand over to Andre.
Thank you, Alex. Good afternoon, everyone, and everyone on the panel. The documentary trailer that you just saw is called Terms and Conditions. It covers every area, essentially, about the false criminalization of a culture, per se. Essentially, what Alex was talking about was people being given these false narratives when they get to court, or maybe not even in court, just in society. There's this thing about whether you're a drill rapper or whether you're an artist, you are a gang member, you are some form of violent, suspect. You're a suspect immediately. Of course, drill per se does have violent connotations to it. There are violent things in drill. There's no word of a lie about that. However, though, this documentary goes into the depth of people using that as a way to get out. And one of the main things about it is people using music as that vehicle, not just as a way out, but also as a mental way out, per se. And the consequences, when you watch the documentary, the consequences that a lot of these artists have faced whilst trying to get out is matched with them fighting for their life. Two of the artists that we had in the beginning, Skengdo and AM, they got the first criminal injunction for music. So they became the first artists to receive a criminal injunction based off of music. They were handed a 2-year suspended sentence for breaching a music injunction. So they went to court and the judge stated that they used their music to target other gang members. Now, after everything was done, it didn't make sense. It was very questionable as to how you can use music as a weapon to other people. And that brought a lot of conversation and a lot of debate. Me as a journalist, I've spoken to many different drill artists. I've sat down with over 100 gang members. I've been to over at least 50 different estates in London. And one of the main things that they speak about when it comes to music is it is a way out for them. And I've been in a few situations where some of my videos or my online reporting has actually been used in a court case to, in a way, itemize or to add a stigma to an artist. And me reporting and adding some form of reality to who they are has in some way, shape, helped some artists. Not going to say any names or anything, but it just goes to show how big this whole thing is. And the documentary was a 12-month period. It was a whole year. There were so many legal things we had to go through, so many different things that we had to do. And that documentary in itself, if you really want to understand the criminalization of drill, or just the false criminalization of being a black man or a black teenager, you should watch the documentary. And yeah, that's me, really.
Sorry, still getting used to muting and unmuting, my fault. We're getting quite a few questions that are coming through, but what I was hoping to do was to address some of those issues at the end and try and give all the panelists an opportunity to say what they wanted to say. Now, Andre, as far as the video that we saw the clip of, the full-length version obviously goes into a lot more details, and you've tried to speak to not only the people that are performing, but also those who have been victims and their family as well, in relation to some of the things which are addressed in the music itself. And were you able to speak with family members and different individuals who have been affected by violence within their locality and their area?
Yeah, I didn't really even mention that. That was, if anything, the most important part of the documentary. Just seeing the raw emotion, and also just the effect that violence has. I come from a rough neighborhood, don't need to go into too much, but I was raised on one of the most dangerous estates in South London, Angeltown Estate, recently making news, been making news just for violence. And I've seen what knife crime, gun culture, gang culture can do to your family. And just sitting down with these family members, going to the places where their child was killed is very gruesome. It's traumatizing, essentially. You have to be very strong mentally to incur that, to be there. You know, I remember there's a woman in the doc. She showed me not the evidence, but the last items that her son had before he died. And she showed me his shoes, and on the back of his shoes was blood. And I remember her breaking down and speaking to me about that. It is very, very, very gruesome. So the documentary showed me that side that, of course, like I said, drill music might be a way out for a lot of people. However, though, there are people that do glamorize this violence, essentially. And as much as it might criminalize you, it's also a slap in the face of those that have lost lives, you know, parents that have lost lives. So yeah, that was for me one of the most traumatic experiences. Like I said, I've seen firsthand damage of knife crime and gang culture. Like I said, I've been raised on one of the most dangerous estates in South London, in London per se. But I don't think I'd ever seen the effect when a parent breaks down in front of you, speaks to you, and you can see the emotion. In fact, not even just see, you can feel the emotion. That's when it's like, this is a serious thing. And I felt like the documentary has had the responsibility to show that knife crime is not just bad because of stats or figures or numbers. It's bad because it's going to leave a hole in somebody else's life. So, yeah.
Indeed, very well said. But as far as the music is concerned, because questions are coming through at the moment now in relation to the music itself, Through your research and you speaking to a number of individuals involved in it, how have you found the situation as far as those individuals trying to find their way out, as you say, from their circumstances in using the music? Do you find that the majority of them are trying to glamorize the use of knives and guns, or just telling a story and reflecting what is happening within their community from their own narrative point?
I think definitely there is a section of people that do use drill music as a way to use it as a weapon, you know. But there is a huge majority of artists that have, and they are testament to using music as a way out. But it's kind of difficult, you know, it's not just an instant thing. However, though, it is easier than it was before. And I think that's why more artists are involved in the music scene, and we're seeing more and more artists, you know, using that as a way to feed their families. In every institution, whether that's music, law, the police department, at your job at Tesco, there will always be a good employee and a bad employee per se. The people that don't, you know, adhere to the rules, they don't do what they're supposed to do, it's quite evident that they're just there, just not for any good reason. But then there are other people that are there, they work hard, they do what they need to do. And that's just basically what it is in music. There's an entity of people that are using drill music as a way of violence, and they're using it as a weapon. It's obvious. I can't sit here and lie and say that that doesn't happen. However, though, there are people that are using it as a way to get out. And the difficult part of it is the fact that they have to balance other things, because if you are a gang member doing music, from when you leave your house, anything can happen to you. The minute you leave your house to the minute you go to the studio to make a song or a music video, anything can happen to you. You can become a victim, you could lose your life, you could be arrested. And in most cases, it's psychologically trying to get them to understand that you need to be able to stay alive, but you need to be able to stay out of prison. And in most cases, some of them don't get that, because they have to leave their house with a knife. They have to leave their house and worry about their protection. And if something happens before they get to the studio, they're not going to be able to make that track for the day. So it's just different things. There's other things such as financial problems with some artists. They don't have enough money to go to the studio. So some of them, they sell drugs, and they're going to be doing that to fund their music career. And in most cases, if you really want to make it, you've got to put aside certain things. Like I said, in every industry, if you want to go straight and you want to do well in it, it comes a point where you're going to have to transition into a more professional person, and you have to become more cautious of what you do. And that's what it was. And you see that in the documentary. We had to psychologically change their minds from who they were to who they wanted to be. And yeah, that's what it was. It's the balance of trying to stay alive, trying to stay out of prison, but also using music as a way out. So in a way, it's a juxtaposition or an oxymoron. It's like two opposites in one. You know, like you want to stay alive, you want to do right, but at the same time, you doing right is going to resort to your death. But at the same time, you want to become a successful musician. So in the documentary, that's explored.
Thank you, Andre.
Yeah.
Thank you, Andre. So we're going to move now on to Abena, who's going to give her experiences and her knowledge. And hopefully, when you hear what she has to say, you'll get another perspective and an understanding in relation to some of the areas that we're trying to address in this webinar. So if I can hand over to Abena now.
Thank you. So I thought I'd use my time to give an overview of some initial findings from an analysis of cases in which rap lyrics from music videos have been used in criminal proceedings. So this is a bit more legalistic, as I'm an academic of criminal law and evidence. And true to my form as a lecturer, I do have slides. So I will attempt to share my screen. Okay, hopefully everyone can see that. So as an academic who mostly does doctrinal research, I have so far been concentrating on looking at reported appeal cases. And many of you will know that the Court of Appeal considers legal arguments and decides whether a conviction is safe or a sentence is fair. Within reported appeal cases, we would or should expect to see the greatest level of analysis of the issues that arise in these cases. And these cases set precedents for the lower courts to follow. So an analysis of appeal cases, in theory at least, should be able to tell us quite a lot about the actual current approach to using and admitting rap lyrics and videos as evidence in criminal cases. However, appeal cases can't tell us everything that's happening day in and day out, and I'd be interested to hear from those in practice as to whether what's happening in the case law actually mirrors your own experiences. To find cases, I've been conducting searches on legal databases, our primary database, Westlaw. I've found 30 reported cases in which music lyrics and music videos have been admitted as evidence in a criminal trial, used as sentencing in a case within England and Wales. And from these cases, a number of themes are immediately apparent, and it's these themes which I'm going to outline. And I think that many of them will be picked up on in other talks and seminars in this series. So my aim for now is to give a sort of overview or outline of what these cases look like, how rap lyrics and videos are being used or dealt with in criminal trials, and some of the immediate problems that arise with this. First of all, just to note that all but 2 of the cases that I've found concern rap music as opposed to any other genre. So the search terms I've been using, some are quite specific, like drill or rap video. Others are quite broad, like lyric. So I expected to capture the range of cases in which music is being treated as evidence. And by and large, it's only rap music which is treated in this way. And also, while we're talking specifically about drill today, I've been looking at rap music more broadly. So the cases from the past few years tend to involve drill, but there's also cases involving grime and road rap and other subgenres. I haven't found any difference in treatment based on what kind of or what subgenre it is. So in terms of the sort of profile and nature of these cases, the cases that I've found were reported between 2005 and 2020. Notably, the most recent 10 cases were reported in the last 2 years, so a third of the cases are coming from the last 2 years, which indicates an upward trend in the use of this kind of evidence, also maybe in challenges to the use of it, because looking at Court of Appeal cases. In most cases, the defendants have been convicted of offences involving weapons, namely firearms offences or violent offences. This is not surprising because reference to weapons and violence is quite common in rap music, especially if we're talking about drill. This in itself suggests that at a minimum, the relevance of this evidence needs to be scrutinised very carefully to make sure that it's actually connected to the crime and its existence isn't merely a coincidence. And I'll talk a bit more about relevance later on. Most of the cases concern offences which were committed and tried in London. Most defendants were in their teens, some in their early teens, and in the cases I've looked at, this evidence has been used exclusively against male defendants. So we can start to get a good idea of the profile of defendants in these cases. Based on information in the cases, rap lyrics and videos were used almost exclusively as evidence against Black people. The trend of adducing rap lyrics as evidence against Black defendants, I think, indicates a deliberate tactic. Prosecutors can draw on stereotypical narratives about Black youth culture and tap into pre-existing biases about Black criminality in order to construct case theories. And we see this also in the link to joint enterprise and gangs. So more than half of the cases concerned offences committed by way of joint enterprise, and 21 out of 30 cases were said to be gang-related. In these cases, the lyrics or videos are often used as evidence of gang membership, association, or affiliation, which is then used to link the defendant to a joint enterprise or as evidence going to some other issue in the case, such as motive. And in some of these cases, the leap from the music to gang membership to guilt is quite startling. So a case that has stood out to me is the case of Sode. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but SODE from 2017. In this case, 2 years before murder, at the time when the appellant was just 14 years old, he'd appeared in a music video where, according to the police expert, he had made remarks and gestures consistent with support for a particular gang. So this was used 2 years later as evidence of his gang membership, and therefore as evidence of motive for a murder, because the prosecution alleged that the murder was a gang revenge attack. So the appellant throwing a gang sign in a music video at 14 years old was used as evidence of gang association 2 years later and evidence of motive for murder, despite the fact that the evidence that this murder was even gang-related was quite flimsy. So the only direct evidence of this came from what looks like quite an unreliable hearsay statement from one witness. I think we should also be concerned about the way in which rap lyrics are being used to link defendants to gangs because of the heavily racialized and ill-defined concept of a gang, as Alex mentioned earlier. So the term gang lacks a precise definition, and Black people are grossly overrepresented on gang databases, sometimes for where they live, sometimes for appearing in drill videos, and the whole thing gets quite circular. The disproportionate application of the term gang to Black males means that the term in itself evokes stereotypical images of Black male criminality. And then rap music can be used in court to amplify those images, to link Black men and boys to crime. And I think that that's really quite concerning. In terms of the legal basis, or the basis for admission of this evidence, where it's specified, it's clear from the case law, rap lyrics and videos are being treated as bad character evidence and being adduced through one of the gateways for admission of bad character evidence under the Criminal Justice Act of 2003, or else they're being treated as to do with the alleged facts of the offense, meaning that they don't need to pass through a specific gateway for admission. I won't talk too much about the ins and outs of bad character law here. But where it is being adduced as bad character evidence, it's most commonly under Gateway D of the 2003 Act as being relevant to an important matter and issue between the defendant and the prosecution. That will vary from case to case, but most commonly it's intention, motive, or to rebut a defense, and often through the link to gang association. So the music is evidence of gang association, which then becomes evidence of motive, intention, or to rebut a defense. One point to raise, which I won't go into detail now, but I think it's something which we do need to question, is the categorization of this as bad character evidence. So why are we so comfortable with conflating art with character in relation to rap music in a way which we don't with other art forms? We wouldn't usually think of it as misconduct or reprehensible, which is sort of legal definition of bad character evidence, to write or perform violent plays or violent novels, or to play violent video games, or to write violent lyrics for other genres. So why do we treat rap music in this way? To me, the answer is quite obvious, because it plays into the racist stereotypes which help prosecutors to construct their case theories. But it's something which maybe needs to be pushed back on. But I'm also aware that perhaps the categorization of this evidence of bad character evidence may be, and this is something which I'm interested in discussing further, may be of some benefit to the defense insofar as there are certain legal provisions which the evidence needs to get through before it's admitted, and it might be treated more cautiously if it's categorized in this way. In terms of the outcome of cases, so not all cases that I've looked at actually involve a direct challenge to the use of this evidence. It's only a minority of cases where this was a ground for appeal. Nonetheless, in almost all cases where it was challenged, those challenges were unsuccessful. I have found only one case where, on appeal, where there was a successful challenge against the use of rap music, and this is the case of Alimi. Be very interested if people are aware of other successful cases. In Alimi, the Court of Appeal quashed a conviction because the defendant's background or presence in the background of two music videos, not doing anything, just being there, was not evidence of gang association in the way which the prosecution had suggested, and the trial judge apparently accepted. The extremely low success rate in these appeal cases is concerning in light of the fact that questions of relevance and prejudicial effect are given quite little scrutiny by the court, despite the racialized and highly prejudicial nature of this evidence. So in the majority of cases, little consideration was given to relevance of the material beyond agreement that it was relevant for whatever purpose it had been adduced by the prosecution. Usually, as I said, to go to motive or intention or to rebut a defense. And this is evidenced by the fact that the context of the material is given very little consideration. So the reported cases tend to lack information about the actual content of the lyrics or the videos, including whether they're actually directly connected to the crime, although it's clear that in the vast majority of cases, I think there's maybe 2 where we could possibly say that these lyrics are actually about this crime. That's not a prerequisite for admission. The Court of Appeal cases also tend to lack basic information about whether the lyrics were written or performed by the defendant as opposed to someone else, the nature and extent of the defendant's involvement, and when the material was created. Was it before or after the offence with which they've been charged with, and how long before or after? And even where these factors are raised, they're not given much consideration. So, which is a shame, because this seems to me to be vital factors in considering whether the evidence is relevant to any issue in a case. But in a case like Sode, for example, where the defense did challenge the admission of a 2-year-old music video, the response of the Court of Appeal was that the age of the material did not reduce its impact or diminish its relevance. No explanation as to why, just a statement, it does not reduce its impact or diminish its relevance. This is especially concerning to me because we're dealing with a very young defendant, and in relation to bad character evidence, the length of time between previous misconduct and the offence charged should be significant in determining its relevance and its admissibility. Discussions of fairness and prejudicial effect also tend to be very sparse in the case law, so with the exceptions of a few cases, the court went only as far as to acknowledge that the evidence is prejudicial, but that it wouldn't be unduly prejudicial, that the jury can be trusted to put emotions aside and attach proper weight to the evidence with a direction from the judge, and sometimes even when an appropriate direction wasn't given. But the direction that needs to be given is kind of a standard bad character evidence direction. It need not necessarily include any information about the broader cultural context, the social influences, the artistic conventions within the rap music genre. And this again is concerning because without that context, it's very difficult to see how this evidence would not be unduly prejudicial. How can a judge or a jury assess the reliability or the weight to be given to this evidence without understanding even basic conventions of rap music, without understanding that this is an art form, an art of storytelling, that it's laden with metaphors, with figurative language, with symbolism, and with boasting. And this is especially important to counteract the images which are so commonly associated with rap, especially with drill. So to wrap up, as a research project, I'm at the sort of early stages with this, but my initial view, and I doubt this will change, is that on the whole, the courts have taken an uninformed, a dismissive, and quite a problematic attitude towards the prejudicial effect of this kind of evidence in light of its limited probative value. That's not to say that it's not relevant or has value in any case, but these things are not being assessed appropriately. And as a result, prosecutors are being allowed to use stereotypical narratives and racist imagery to construct case theories, taking rap music literally in a way which we don't do with other art forms. And the potential consequences of this are very serious. We're talking about potential wrongful convictions as well as the further over-criminalization of Black people. In terms of where we go from here, I'm just starting to think about this. It may be that a sort of blanket exclusionary rule subject to some exception is the only way to prevent gross unfairness. But as a minimum, I think that admissibility decisions need to be much more rigorous and better informed. So there could, for example, be a checklist of factors for judges to take into account in determining the relevance and admissibility of this evidence, which would need to be done with a solid understanding of conventions and social influences of rap music. And for that, we need the input of experts, which I'll end on that note because Ethna is the expert, and I think we'll be talking more about that.
Thank you very much, Abena. One of the questions that have come through, which I think you might be able to deal with, and the concern that's been raised, it's a sort of two-edged question. One deals with the issue of joint enterprise, but also the appearance of individuals who are not necessarily identified as gang members or any evidence to suggest that they were involved in the gang, but do appear within the videos. And how, through any of the research you've done, you've been able to see how that problem is resolved, in the sense that you have a video in which a number of individuals may be identified as being part of the gang, but then you also have a number of other individuals who were just in the background, who just appeared in the video, and they may even, in fact, appear in more than one video, and how that situation causes difficulties when they come to be before the court for one reason or another, and that video is played, which really just has them there in the background. Have you come across that as a situation, and how that's dealt with?
Do you mean like situations where why is the video being played as evidence of a co-defendant's membership, and unfortunately they're just in the background, or as evidence against them?
Indeed, it's sort of both. That's why I said it's got sort of two edges to it, that they are on trial with others who may very well be involved in it, or indeed that they're not on trial with individuals who were, but the prosecution wished to make use of the fact that within that video there were known gang members, and therefore they're able to use the video to show that is a gang, and whereas another individual who's not part of the gang, but the video still gets played, and the impact that has on the jury in relation to that video being played where they were just merely there in the background. I think that's what one of the questions was trying to get at.
Right, okay. I mean, there are certainly cases where presence in the background has been used to associate one defendant with other defendants, and therefore the gang, even if they're not necessarily a gang member. And this comes up in the case of Lewis, 2014 case following the riots of 2011. And the court did set some sort of limits on the amount of participation necessary to establish gang membership. But it seems that if you're in the background of more than one video, that might be enough. There's also, and the name of the case isn't coming to my mind, but there are certainly a couple of cases where someone has been in the background of videos, but it's not necessarily alleged that they're a gang member, and it's basically dealt with through directions to the jury. We'll tell the jury not to hold this against this particular defendant. This isn't evidence of their gang association, and that seems to be the approach.
So basically the jury just asks to block it out of their minds, what they've seen repeatedly over...
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming unless the video can be edited to edit this particular person out, but otherwise this is evidence against A and not B, or don't hold this against B.
Yes, well, I think
are few and far between, because if the person is in the videos, then the prosecution will want to treat that as evidence of their association and participation in this also.
Indeed. Well, thanks very much for that. So we'll move on now to Ethna.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex. Thanks to Garden Court for putting on this excellent series, and I'm delighted to be here. So I want to just pick up on some of the points made by Andre and Abanar, and talk about the deep procedural unfairness in how rap is being used in criminal proceedings. I've worked on cases not as far back as Alex in 2005, right? But I started in 2008, so long before the emergence of drill. But certainly there's a much more concerted and frequent use of rap evidence. There's much more of a playbook now that's established in how rap evidence is being used than there was back in 2005 or 2008, since the emergence of drill. So what happens when drill videos and lyrics are plucked from their intended context and aired as evidence in court? And who gets to interpret rap evidence? Who gets to lead the interpretation of rap evidence in the courtroom? Those are the questions I want to get at, to follow on from what Abanar was just saying. And I want to start with some very brief snatches of a couple of drill videos that prosecutions have used in trials that I've been instructed in, just to give you a flavour of how this plays out in the courtroom. So watch these snippets. They're going to come back to back. They're quite different. They're both drill. They're both conspiracy cases in which there are multiple defendants. That speaks to the co-defendant issue we were just talking about. And imagine yourself as a typical juror in a serious crime case, and prosecution plays this material. So I think Amy's there in the background.
Free the man them. Listen, my squad mash work, you should know this. Skirt, jump out the whip, smoke coming out of two noses. In OT, man run it up, ain't coming back to my pockets all bulging. Try and fuck with the kid.
Big bro just got new corn for the spin. That made my day. Gotta see what this one's saying. Slide round rack, that's training days. Still do it on the A. All masked up, give clout to the A. I was 16 with a shotty, same size as a ram, trying to aim for a face. Shouts out my batch. How much blood do we left on the pave? Half of your squad's been done. How they shoot 6-7K. Shit
Okay, so what can these videos tell us about the rappers who feature in them? What can they tell jurors about the people standing next to the rappers, as was just discussed, nodding their heads, gesticulating, or just hanging out? At first glance, such rap evidence tends to look quite damning in court cases. Drill is designed to shock. As a genre, it's designed to shock and discomfort, and its tales of bravado, crime, menace, and dissident lifestyles can cause a strong emotional response. That's what it intends to do. And this can be laden with stereotypical meaning, especially in a courtroom context immersed in the details of a criminal or violent incident. So the videos and lyrics in legal terms tend to be highly prejudicial. That's to say, it opens the door for prejudgments, for racist stereotypical thinking about young black working class men in relation to violence and crime. And so now, certainly social scientists have started, there are some studies now that prove that the rap evidence in courtrooms is very prejudicial. And also we're getting some enlightened judges who have admitted that it's prejudicial. So if I can share my screen. So this is a 2020 judge at the Old Bailey in a legal argument ruling. And he said, drill lyrics can be highly prejudicial. The glorification of death, use of lethal weapons in the way that these lyrics portray can of course have an adverse effect on any juror's approach to a defendant or, by inevitable association in a trial, a co-defendant. Right, so there we see that playing the drill music in court not only affects the defendant who might be in the drill music, but also co-defendants get swept into this narrative in very dangerous ways. So there's one enlightened judge. So definitely this music is very prejudicial in court cases. Rap is also notoriously difficult to interpret. Lyrics are recounted in the first person as if it's personal testimony. Rappers claim to be keeping it real, which adds to the hype and the immediacy. But of course, though there are autobiographical traces in drill artists are actually telling stories that are full of fiction, exaggerations, stock phrases, and metaphors, as we've already heard. And they're often doing so with the hope of entertaining friends and making money out of their music. In the case of the second snippet of the masked young men that I just played, they did make substantial money and they got a mainstream sponsorship deal, which is what many of these young people are dreaming of. And that's something that I was very struck by in Andre's talk just now. Andre was talking just about this through music, just trying to find a pathway to making money, to getting some to establishing themselves, and that sense of mobility or of using music as a pathway is absolutely central, I think, in many of these cases of motivation for making drill. So drill is a highly provocative and yet it's a slippery form of expression. It's wide open to possibilities for misinterpretation. So for these two reasons, its prejudicial nature and its ability to be misinterpreted, rap is toxic in court cases. Yet despite these dangers, who are the gatekeepers who get to select this evidence and guide judge and jury in their interpretation in court? It's surely shocking that the answer to this question is that very often it's police officers working in tandem with prosecutors who appear as the gatekeepers, letting this music in and acting as the chief interpreters in trials. So my focus in this brief talk is on the reliance on police officers as rap experts and on the kinds of claims that this helps prosecution make in their cases. And I want to suggest that there is a resulting gross imbalance in the amount of resources that prosecution have versus defense counsels, as Alex has already talked about in dealing with rap evidence. There's truly a wide gulf between prosecution and defense in terms of this resourcing, and this urgently needs addressing to ensure fair trials. So I'll take prosecution first and then turn very briefly to defense. Many youngsters engage in the highly popular form of drill, not just as consumers, but as practitioners. They record their verse and videos through cheap technologies. Once stored on phones and through digital media circulation like YouTube, their raps can become a ready cache of material that the police can trawl through and convert into criminal evidence. Police find and then interpret rap lyrics and videos in preparation for trial. They then write up reports, and typically they take the stand to introduce the rap in court as part of Crown's case. I mean, I've seen cases where it wasn't rap experts, it wasn't police experts, it was kind of gang social worker experts. But in almost all cases that I've seen, and I've seen nearly 20 cases that I've been instructed in, it tends to be police officers or former police officers who are acting as experts, supposedly neutral experts, but actually fielding the prosecution's, fielding the rap evidence within the prosecution's case. Substantial resources are now ploughed into this. I came across this quote in a police report in a case I recently worked on, in which more than 20 rap videos were being considered. And just, you know, Abhinav was just talking about a 2-year-old rap video. In this case, some of the rap videos were 5 years old. They were 5 years before the incident, without any explanation, as with what Abhinav was saying in terms of the appeal court ruling. No explanation of why there was relevance to have 5-year-old, 4-year-old raps posted back then that seem salient and are relevant to this case. So 20 videos being considered, more than 20. And the PC who wrote the report, she claimed she spent in excess of 100 hours analysing, transcribing and translating YouTube videos for investigation. 100 hours. That's a massive commitment of resources by the police targeting Black youth expressive culture to feed into Crown's cases. And there's a steady stream of police experts who can be called. In fact, one London police expert described himself in a case as part of the drill music translation card. That was in his report. So the police interpreters see themselves as a kind of small quasi-military outfit, a card. This is an organised practice. The Met have an established playbook for using rap and other social media evidence, which they know can help to lock down cases. And troublingly, what I've seen is that when prosecution places lots of emphasis on rap in their case narrative, it can be a sign that they're short on hard circumstantial evidence against a defendant. Particularly, we see this in group trials, which we've already discussed, in conspiracy, in joint enterprise, very often cases with gang narratives. So rap is used dangerously to suggest guilt by association in cases where multiple defendants are in the dock. And the need to scrutinise and debunk dubious gang narratives, especially in draconian joint enterprise cases, is rightly at the heart of this important webinar series in sessions to come at Garden Court. The problem is wider than that police experts might misinterpret the rap lingo in their translations. In fact, quite often they do a reasonable job at actually just doing a translation. The problem has more to do with how they and prosecutors frame meaning, what they leave out, and what they emphasize. To take one quick illustrative example from a case at the beginning of this year, prosecution had found drill rap verses in the notes of the phone of a successful drill artist who was then charged with joint enterprise murder. They seized on various lyrics and especially one line, which they claimed correlated with the incident, suggesting that the defendant either witnessed or engaged in this stabbing attack. I had devilish thoughts when I witnessed a body get chopped. It looked bad. They made a lot of the fact that this lyric was last saved a few days after the stabbing had taken place on his phone. But what they failed to say, and what their police interpreter didn't put into his report, was that this lyric was a rewording of a lyric saved before the incident. I've had devilish thoughts since I witnessed a body get dropped. So the basic rhyme, and indeed most of the verse that accompanied this line, had been first composed prior to the stabbing. This verse went on to be a very successful freestyle with more than 2.5 million views. It's high-end Black youth expressive culture. This is somebody who has made it. The line of lyric they wanted to use is far from the diary entry the state was claiming. And this is quite typical, this kind of strategy. Such cherry-picking particular lyrics in ways that fundamentally distort meaning is not uncommon. Through such strategies, whether deliberate or not, prosecutors and their police experts can quite often arrive at inaccurate readings that shore up the cases. And I've seen this many times, and I expect juicy examples will come in next week's webinar when we look at how to exclude rap evidence, drill evidence from trials. So just finally then, very briefly, what about the defence? Surely defence can just rebut the dodgy claims made about rap. In some cases, and as in this case of this famous drill artist, they certainly did. They get the rap material excluded before it ever goes before the jury. However, quite often, and we don't know exactly how often, defence counsels don't call any expert to scrutinise this evidence. In such cases, the inflammatory material goes in uncontested. And having started looking into a few cases in which rap evidence went completely unchallenged, I've seen that the outcomes for defendants can be very, very concerning. In other cases, the rap is contested, but only by the defence counsel themselves, who often have a poor understanding of rap and are in danger of themselves being subject to the same race and class biases as society as a whole. While some defence teams don't know to call experts for something like rap, others try to find experts and fail to source any. And when they do find experts, these people certainly don't have 100 hours to devote to translating rap like police officers might. So generally, defence is outgunned and out-resourced. One side has a steady stream of experts and an established playbook that relies on crudely instrumental stereotypes. The other has few experts and their instruction is much more patchy and ad hoc. So that's a gross inequality, and that's what I want to foreground today. This targeting of black youth expressive culture, a targeting of young black men and boys through their art, leads to a pattern or practice of unfairness in the criminal justice system. On this procedural basis alone, this huge asymmetry in criminal proceedings between prosecution and defence, rap culture should not, in my view, be admitted to trial. And don't get me wrong, some young men, as Andre was talking about, some young men who write drill lyrics may have engaged in acts of serious violence. Sometimes their drill lyrics might have relevance to that violence. But even the rap, if the rap seems to be relevant, the lyric or video, once it becomes evidence, remains highly prejudicial. Claims to do with its relevance need to be handled with extreme caution. They must be very closely scrutinised. That scrutiny is not consistently taking place. So to repeat, on that basis, I would argue that lyrics and videos should not be going in. They're doing so supported by police gatekeepers amounts to a practice that's structurally racist. It's systematically unjust, and it's classist, and it has very serious implications potentially for individuals, not just potentially. Short of banning the use of rap evidence from court cases, there are things we can do, both on the prosecution side, challenging police expertise, what is the basis of their expertise, and what is the basis of their neutrality, and on the defence side, to mitigate this inequality. And that's, we need more experts, we need more lawyers to know to call experts. And as I say, I'm really looking forward to next week's webinar and future important webinars in this series on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ethna. We've had a number of questions. I think your screen share is still on at the moment. Right. Yeah, we've had a number of questions, and I'm going to try to separate them as much as I can and allocate them. The first one is to you, Andre, and there's been a number of questions asked about your use of the word weapon, in the sense that some individuals have used music as a weapon, and I think they just wanted some clarification about what you meant by that when you were trying to explain that certain individuals who are making the music and performing it would be using it as a weapon. I don't know if you could expand on that or explain what you mean by that.
I'd say specifically, if you say a name of a deceased person, I think that is a weapon. If you say somebody's name that has died, in a mocking manner. There was a song that I reported on last year from the drill group Zone 2, and they dropped a song called No Censor. Now, within that song, there was a frequent use of rival gang members that had been killed. And that song became the quickest drill song to reach 1 million views, but also the quickest drill song to ever be removed from a UK music platform. And that kind of showed how much just the use of certain words can cause an uproar, because the song got reported so many times. So specifically, when a song is weaponized, when a song is used as a weapon, it's used when an artist says the name of somebody that is dead. Usually the reason why that is such a problem, or the reason why that is so dangerous, is, as you can imagine, if the parents are crying over their child dying, imagine the feeling a parent would feel watching a music video where somebody is mocking their dead child. That is a weapon in itself, and I don't think I even need to explain how that would make the parent feel. So I think that is a obvious example of somebody using a drill song as a weapon. I believe in freedom of speech. However, though, I also believe in abusing freedom of speech. So you can say what you want. Music is a form of art. However, though, you can't abuse that, that right that we have. And when you do, that's when it's a problem, and that's when it's a weapon.
Thank you very much, Andre. I hope that gets across the concern that one of the attendees was asking. Another question that's come through, as I said, there's quite a lot of them. There was some issue in relation to how do we go about, or what's the best approach the panel overall feels that we can deal with pressures being placed on the CPS and judges in relation to using these lyrics or using music in this way and in a wrong way. And I suppose to some extent it's education. I don't know if the panelists have a different view about this, but the whole purpose of trying to do this webinar session and this whole series is to educate and to try to provide more information to all parties, including judges, including the general public who will make up the jury, and the police, so that it's not one-sided, as Ethna was trying to put across, because at the moment the resources all seem to be geared towards the police taking down various videos and various songs, but also in relation to how they present that evidence in court. So I don't know if the panelists had any other particular view about how do we try to rectify this imbalance and try to put pressure, if that's the correct way to put it, on the Crown Prosecution Service, the police and the judiciary, and the whole criminal justice system.
Me? Who should go first?
Necessarily you, Andre. I think
Yeah.
this is to the whole panel, I think, because there's a number of different questions, and I've tried to sort of put them all together as one question, but I think it's a question that all of us really have to try to seek to answer if we can, or at least address the question.
Yeah, quickly, I'd say definitely relating to your point. I think Abina was speaking about this as well. Yeah, definitely education, understanding what's what. I would say directly a translator, somebody that would sit in the courtroom and more or less dictate what is being said and try to make it as accurate as possible. However, though, music is, you can turn around and say music is non-fiction. What's being said is just entertainment. So I would definitely say, yeah, educating everyone within the legal system, maybe a course about certain languages. Yeah, Abina, I'll let Abina go.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you said, pressure, and maybe it needs to be constant pressure, use of, as I was saying, experts are vital in this to push back against police narratives, but also in general to do that education. I don't want to say too much, but I don't believe this all comes from a place of ignorance. I think that a lot of prosecutors and police know exactly what they're doing. Even some of our oldest judges were around, relatively young at the time of gangster rap coming up in the 80s and things. We know what this is. We're not ignorant to the fact that this is an art form and much of it is fictional and so on. So I do think it needs to be a constant pushback. And so there's a responsibility and obligation on defense to be pushing back and using experts to help with that and so on, so that it becomes sort of undeniable, these issues. I will stop.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a kind of a supply and demand issue. And on the prosecution side, we do need to sort of try and target supply, which is targeting this ready supply of police who seem willing to offer half-truths. I mean, they do reasonable, readings quite often of the rap lyrics, but then from there, then this cherry picking, which really can be very misleading in terms of the kind of evidence that can make the lyrics seem relevant. And then once the material's in there, then all the prejudicial value can happen in the court case. You just have to find that way for prosecution and police to get the material into the courtroom. And to do that, there is a tendency to suggest there is relevance by just extracting a particular lyric, half a rhyming couplet, just before a rapper might then completely disown or contradict what they've just said. So this cherry picking is really, really a problem. So police need to be educated. Their expertise needs to be questioned, because they go for these overly literal, overly realist, overly autobiographical kinds of interpretations. Their neutrality has to be questioned. I really think it's a systemic problem. And then on the defense side, I think really we need to spread the word amongst lawyers, because I have heard from lawyers, they just didn't know that this was a proper area in which they could call a rap expert for the defense. In very serious cases, in murder cases, they just didn't think that this was an area, even though the police are there presenting the evidence in the prosecution's case. Some defense counsels do not know that this is an area in which they can properly call a defense expert. So that's increasing the demand for defense, but equally the supply then of experts is, as has already been said, there aren't enough at the moment, and we don't have the police resourcing. So we're trying to do, I'm leading a project called Prosecuting Rap, in which we're trying to build capacity, share knowledge, build a network of support, so that there are more people, and there are more, I'm finding out that there are people out there doing amazing work. So it's a really interesting moment to hear, and really Garden Court Chambers is the place where we're going to be able to disseminate this and find out more about what's going on and what kinds of rebuttals people are mounting. But there really is a systemic problem in which at the moment there hasn't been the expertise, and sadly, I think a lot of trials consequently have been, potentially unsafe. A lot of convictions.
Yeah. Thank you, Ethna. Another area that's raised in the questions is about the use of the sort of first person when somebody's actually singing lyrics. And I think you've made reference to it, that an individual may say, "I did this" or "I did that." And I was the one that did this, or I witnessed that. Is that something which is common within songs? Because certainly I'm certainly from my research and my understanding as far as cases are concerned, as well as lyrics, is that it's not an uncommon situation for somebody to write in the first person. And this is not something which is specific to rap music or drill music, that a lot of people who write songs write in the first person. And I'll just give you one example on this, a song which people probably will know but may never have looked at it from the same point of view. It's by Tom Jones, and the song is Delilah. And the song is actually, it has lyrics in it about an individual who crossed the street. In fact, he says, "I crossed the street to her house. She opened the door. She stood there laughing. I felt the knife in my hand, and she's laughing no more. And that's a Tom Jones song, written in the first person about somebody going to a house because he thinks that his girlfriend is having an affair with somebody else, and he stabs her to death. I don't think people will think about Delilah in the same way again, but that is written in the first person. Have you come across songs that are written in the first person, or is this a common feature through lyrics?
Is it me?
No, it was to Ethna.
Oh, okay, sorry. Yeah, well, I wrote a book on gangster rap, which is how this began, a scholarly book. And yeah, I mean, the adopting of personas, adopting and then dropping personas, adopting the bad man, from Black folkloric traditions. Actually, the first person goes way back into vernacular, into oral culture. You bluster and you perform, and it's to do with bravado and exaggeration, and you're the bad man. And then you suddenly drop the persona, start saying why you're actually performing that particular persona, and at which point you shift to a different one. So there's actually real complexity around subjectivity, identification in rap. It's a very reflexive, it reflects on itself, and that's actually true in drill, that's true in grime. So there's these shifting perspectives, but absolutely at the heart of it is the excitement and the adrenaline and the immediacy that comes from putting yourself into the position of the first person narrator. I did is always more exciting than they did, or than they witnessed. But I'll just say one thing, which is I have seen joint enterprise cases, and joint enterprise is so alarming the way that it's playing out in disproportionality for young black men, and this is something important. Of course, it's going to be coming up, and it's a very live issue right now. But where rappers even say, he did X, he did Y, and they're still swept in through rap into a joint enterprise murder conviction. So yeah, certainly the first person is a particular problem. It makes rappers particularly susceptible to the use of this criminalization in courtrooms. But actually, even when you're the third person rapper and you're talking about others, if you then are seen to be bearing witness, then under joint enterprise, that can still suck you in. So that's a very problematic area.
Thank you, Ethna. Some other questions coming in about the commercial viability of these songs, but I think Andre, you touched on some of that. Although there may be real difficulties as far as what the narrative and what these songs are about, it doesn't seem to prevent the songs becoming popular and people wanting to listen to them. And so therefore, I think the question is trying to deal with, can it be a situation where people decide to move away from talking about these types of incidents and talk about other things? Or is the genre sort of stuck in talking about what is happening, whether it's real or fictional, but the violent context of...
Yeah, essentially, I think it's all entertainment at the end of the day. Like, I feel like if you watch a film or if you you play a video game, that essence that you get from playing it, that it's a thrill and it keeps you from playing it. It's the same thing with music. And I think there's other ways now for you to be entertained through music other than just the lyrics. So I'd say the most successful drill rapper in the UK is a guy called Heady One. Now he started doing videos on his block, in his estate, just, it looked really gritty and, it looked scary. But the other day, last month, he just did a song with one of the biggest rappers in the world, Drake. And he's not necessarily talking about violence or anything, but the video quality is amazing. And it makes you respect the artist more, not because of his lyrics, but because of the effort that he's putting in graphically, marketing-wise and branding-wise. So I think that's the most important thing with music. other than just the lyrics. So we do see certain artists, they talk a lot of, like, as they say, smoke or violence. And then later on, because they change their lifestyle and they're not doing what they say they were doing, they start rapping about different things. The views go down and they're not making as much money. However, though, their core fan base is still there because they respect the fact that they have transitioned from not just being a violent street rapper, but now somebody has put in money and time into their craft, into what they're doing, and essentially that's just what it is. In the beginning, yeah, the violence and rapping about certain things is the entertaining part, but then as it goes on, their core fan bases stay with them because they just respect the fact that they've stuck to what they're doing, essentially. And I think that's the balance there, because essentially people say you can't be a drill rapper unless you're doing violence. And there is some truth to that. Whether you want to say music is just entertainment or music is fiction or non-fiction, there is a small element of drill that in order for you to qualify as a drill rapper, you have to have done a specific number of things. So when you stop doing those things, you can't really be considered a drill rapper anymore because you don't live that life. So, yeah.
But on the other side to that, Andre, you do have other groups. In particular, I was thinking about a group called Hope Dealers, and their rap and their drill music. So the music and the beat is exactly the same, but what they're talking about is from a Christian perspective, and so therefore their lyrics and the message they're getting across is completely different. And also somebody like Drill Minister, whose lyrics and certainly records that he has done in the past has changed and developed, and now he's even calling it political drill and dealing with issues of political nature, etc. So I think there to some extent is a distinction between the music and the beat and the subject matter, which people tend to talk about. So I think in the past, it may be correct that it may have started from one avenue, but it certainly developed much further than that. And I think recently there was even somebody who was using it as a what do they call it? I think it was on that program called Famalam, and it was a drillagram, and somebody was even using the genre in order to sort of poke fun and to present a joke or whatever to somebody. So I think the genre, again, the distinction between the genre itself and the music and the beat and the lyrics and what they're talking about are obviously what has to be untangled, and sometimes it's very difficult to untangle one from the other.
Yeah. Essentially, I think there are, like, music is music based off of the beat and not necessarily the language. So like you said, what makes a drill artist a drill artist is essentially, yes, whether or not he's done such and such in the streets, but it's also the beat, it's the music. So somebody like Drill Minister, he's a drill rapper because he uses drill beats. Hope Dealers, you'd classify them as drill rappers because they use drill beats. But now what is happening now is just like what you said. There's different messages being spoken on these beats, that subgenres are being created now. You know, there's even gay drill now, if you don't know. And that, in an essence, kind of shows how progressive the genre has gone, if that makes sense, where we can accept political drill, whereby a drill rapper, Drill Minister, when he raps about quite a lot of educational stuff. You know, if you didn't know what Brexit was and you listened to a few of his songs, you would kind of get a grasp on what that is. And then, like you said, Hope Dealers, you know, if you want to get a touch in your faith, you listen to them. And then, like I said, the gay drill genre just shows an essence of opening every single avenue. There's even property drill. There's international drill. Like, drill now has become such a brand that there are different entities, and drill is just an umbrella, and there's so many different things living underneath it. So I think it's very important that artists stay true to themselves, but they also make sure that they tell people exactly the truth of what they're rapping about. So I think it's very important that rappers say this is true and this is not true, or they say this is fiction and this is not fiction. And I think that's very important, and that's why we see a lot of artists go into court and ended up going to jail, because there's no way of distinguishing whether what they're doing is fiction or non-fiction. There's always a grey area. So I think it's important to have rappers like Drill Minister or even Hope Dealers that diversify the genre, so that when we have conversations like this, we can say, well, hold on, drill is not just 100% violent. There are other people in this entity that are trying to bring out a completely different message. So, yeah.
Thank you. I think we're about to run out of time, if we haven't run out of time. I know Amy and David are in the background, so if I've run over too much, then I'm sure they'll put an end to it. But drawing to a conclusion on what we've been talking about, yesterday it was drawn to my attention that one of the major TV stations or streaming services is now about to produce or put out a 6-part documentary, so-called documentary, but I think it's past fiction, on drill and grime. And it unfortunately, I think it's only going to be available on Amazon, but it just shows how things have moved on, certainly from 15, 20 years ago, to the development of drill and the use of music, and sort of ending on the words of Biggie Small. If you don't know, now you know. And hopefully we've at least imparted some information to you which assists. Sorry I haven't been able to answer all the questions and deal with all the issues, but the questions were coming in thick and fast. What I can say is that there's a lot of material which is going to be disseminated after this webinar session. And so quite a lot of the questions which people were asked, which were quite specific, will be addressed in the material which is going to be circulated round, in particular cases and references which Abena had made mention of and Ether had made mention of. So some of that material, for those who wish to get the further details, will be disseminated in the material and articles which are going to be sent round. So looking at the time now, I'd just like to thank everybody for being a part of this first session. As I said, there are 5 more webinars which are going to follow, and we all hope that this webinar at least has whet your appetite and at least given you some indication, some idea of the issues surrounding it. And there's a lot more to come, a lot more individuals who are participating as panelists, and I'm sure a lot more questions that will be coming as well. So we would all like to thank you for all taking part, and hope you've all enjoyed and have been educated in one way or another in relation to this genre. So I'd just like to sign off and say thank you, and leave it to the other panelists to thank you as much as I am at this stage.
Thank you all. Have a good night, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you very much, and thank you for organizing, Alex.
Thank you, Alex.